He was a ghost, a legend in his own mind. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Mako Strickland moved through the world with the quiet, coiled power of a predator, a power he had honed over 15 years and countless deployments as a United States Navy SEAL. His body was a weapon, his mind a tactical computer, and his reputation preceded him like a shockwave. To the 1,040 troops seated in the vast hangar-like auditorium of the Naval Amphibious Base in Coronado, he was a living embodiment of the ethos they all strived to achieve. To his wife, Lena, sitting ramrod straight in the second row, he was a source of pride, anxiety, and, increasingly, a quiet, suffocating fear. The event was a mandatory stress management and family resilience seminar, part of a broader initiative to support the mental health of the special operations community. The irony of its title, Strength Through Unity, was not lost on Lena. The auditorium buzzed with the low hum of hundreds of conversations, a sea of digital desert camouflage and sharp haircuts. The air smelled of floor wax, coffee, and nervous anticipation. Lena clutched the armrests of her hard plastic chair, her knuckles white. She was here to support her husband, to play the part of the proud, stoic military spouse. But her stomach was a knot of dread. The friction had started 3 days ago. A minor thing. A credit card bill for $100 she'd spent on a new winter coat for their son. It was practical, necessary. But in Marcus's world, it was an unauthorized expenditure, a breach of the rigid control he tried to exert over their lives. The argument had been short, sharp, and brutal in its silence. He hadn't shouted. And he never did. His anger was a cold, quiet thing, a pressure that filled their small, on-base house until Lena felt she couldn't breathe. The final exchange had been a single, clipped sentence from him as he'd left for a morning PT session. We'll talk about this later. Those 5 words had hung in the air, a promise of a reckoning. Now, sitting in the auditorium, that reckoning was just a seat away. Marcus sat beside her, his posture perfect, his eyes fixed on the speaker at the podium. His presence was a gravitational field, pulling all the energy in her direction. He hadn't spoken to her since they'd sat down. He didn't need to. His message was communicated through the rigid set of his jaw. The way his knee, vibrating with suppressed energy, was a deliberate inch from touching hers, a territorial claim. The seminar droned on. A Navy chaplain spoke about the pressures of deployment. A psychologist discussed communication techniques. A panel of seasoned spouses shared their coping strategies, their voices trembling with practiced vulnerability. Lena heard none of it. Her entire being was focused on the man beside her, hyper-aware of his every micro-movement. She saw the slight twitch in his temple when the psychologist mentioned the importance of emotional availability. She felt the barely perceptible shift in his weight when a spouse spoke about the challenges of financial management during a deployment. Each topic was a fresh landmine. The keynote speaker was introduced. Commander Elias Vance, a retired SEAL with a chest full of medals and a gentle, grandfatherly demeanor that seemed at odds with his fearsome reputation. And he spoke about the concept of post-traumatic growth, about channeling the intensity required for combat into building stronger families. He was captivating, his words painting a picture of a warrior who was also a whole human being. He spoke of vulnerability not as a weakness, but as the ultimate form of courage. Lena felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. This was the man she had married, the man buried somewhere beneath the layers of operational stress and unprocessed trauma. She glanced at Marcus. His expression was unreadable, a granite mask. But she saw his hands clasped in his lap, and the knuckles were white, just like hers. Commander Vance opened the floor for a Q&A session. For a moment, there was a respectful silence, the kind that precedes a storm. Then, a young, fresh-faced sailor in the front row raised his hand. He was acknowledged and stood, his voice cracking slightly with nerves. "Sir, How do you reconcile the aggression, the mindset we're trained to have with being a gentle husband or father at home? How do you turn it off? It was the million-dollar question. Vance smiled warmly. Son, that's the whole ball game, isn't it? He began. It's not about turning it off. It's about integration. The same discipline, the same loyalty, the same protective instinct you have for your teammates, you channel into your family. But it has to be tempered with empathy, with communication. Marcus shifted in his seat. Lena felt the movement like a seismic tremor. The commander's answer seemed to be grating on him. To Marcus, it sounded like weakness, a dilution of the warrior spirit. And he saw the SEAL teams as a bastion of strength, not a laboratory for emotional experiments. Another question was asked, and then another. The tension in the room had eased, replaced by a genuine sense of engagement. Then, the moderator pointed to a woman in the second row. Lena's heart stopped. It was her. She hadn't raised her hand. Her face flushed crimson. She looked wildly around, and then her eyes met Marcus's. In them she saw a flash of pure, incandescent fury. He thought she had done this deliberately, to embarrass him, to put them on display. The moderator, seeing her flustered state, smiled encouragingly. "Ma'am, you had a question?" Lena's mind raced. She had to say something, anything. Her voice, when it came out, was a thin, reedy whisper. She stood on trembling legs. "Commander Vance," she began, now her voice barely carrying beyond the first few rows. "What do you do when the communication isn't just broken, but weaponized? When the strength he talks about feels like a cage?" A profound silence fell over the auditorium. It was a question of startling intimacy and pain, a window into a world the troops were trained to suspect but rarely see. Commander Vance's face softened with understanding. He leaned forward, his expression one of deep compassion. "That," he said quietly, "is a place no one should have to live, and it requires a different kind of courage to speak about it." His gaze shifted, scanning the audience, not looking for the source of the pain, but acknowledging its existence. Marcus was rigid. A muscle in his jaw jumped violently. To him, Lena's question was an act of mutiny, a public betrayal that undercut his authority and his image. In his world, you handled your problems in the house, behind closed doors. You never, ever aired your dirty laundry in front of the troops. His humiliation was a physical pain, a burning acid in his gut. As Lena sat back down, her body shaking, the world seemed to move in slow motion. She felt a wave of cold contempt emanating from her husband, so potent it was like a physical force. The Q&A session ended, and Commander Vance was escorted off the stage. The room began to stir, people stretching and talking, the formal part of the evening over. It was a transition period before a casual reception in the adjoining hall. As the crowd began to thin, Marcus turned to her. His voice was a low, venomous hiss, meant only for her. "What the hell was that?" He didn't wait for an answer, and he stood abruptly, grabbing her upper arm. His grip was like a steel vise, his fingers digging into the soft flesh of her bicep with a pressure that promised bruises. "You think you can humiliate me in front of my entire command?" Lena winced, trying to pull her arm back. "Marcus, you're hurting me. Let go." He didn't let go. He leaned in closer, his face inches from hers. The noise of the departing crowd swirled around them, a chaotic cocoon that made their private drama seem invisible. "I don't care if I'm hurting you. You need to learn a lesson. You do not speak for me. You do not embarrass me. Remember who I am. Remember, I'm a Navy SEAL." The words were meant to intimidate, to remind her of his status, his power, his physical dominance. He expected her to cower, to apologize, to shrivel under the weight of his authority. He expected submission. But something in Lena snapped. It wasn't a sudden burst of courage, but the final catastrophic failure of a dam that had been holding back a flood for years. The years of walking on eggshells, the silent treatments, the belittling comments, the financial control, the fear that lived in her chest like a permanent resident. It all converged into a single blinding point of clarity. His words, meant to crush her, were the key that unlocked a strength she didn't know she possessed. He was a Navy SEAL, and she was his wife. But right now, in this moment, he was just a man using his size to terrorize a woman. In the fluid world of the SEALs, Marcus had been trained to recognize and counter a threat in a fraction of a second. But his threat assessment was geared toward enemy combatants, not his 140-pound wife. And he was utterly unprepared for what happened next. Lena stopped trying to pull away. She relaxed her arm for a microsecond, a deceptive stillness. Then, with a speed born of pure instinct and desperate self-preservation, she acted. She didn't think about it. Her body knew what to do before her mind could catch up. It was a simple, effective self-defense move she had learned in a base-sponsored women's safety course years ago, a class he had scoffed at. She rotated her arm sharply against the grip of his thumb and forefinger, the weakest part of his hold. Simultaneously, she dropped her weight, stepping forward and to the side, breaking his balance. As he stumbled forward, caught off guard, she brought her free hand up, not in a fist, but in a hard, sharp strike to the side of his neck, a precise, stunning blow to the carotid sinus. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. Marcus's eyes went wide with shock. The air left his lungs in a surprised oof. His grip on her arm vanished as his hands flew instinctively to his throat. His knees, the knees of a man who could run miles with a 100-pound pack, buckled. He didn't just stumble. He dropped. He went down hard, collapsing onto the polished concrete floor of the auditorium in a heap. He lay there, gasping, stunned, utterly defeated. For a single, heart-stopping second, there was silence in their immediate vicinity. Then, the silence shattered. The 1,040 troops, sailors, and their families who were still filing out, who had been engaged in their own conversations, froze. Every head in the area turned. The scene before them was incomprehensible. A highly decorated Navy SEAL, an apex predator, lying on the floor, and then his wife standing over him, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a terrifying mix of fury and fear. A murmur rippled through the crowd, a wave of shock that quickly grew into a roar of whispers. "Is that Chief Strickland? What happened? Did she just—" Senior officers, their faces masks of professional concern, began to move toward the scene. Younger sailors stared, their jaws agape. Marcus, his pride wounded far more deeply than his body, struggled to get up. The room spun. He looked up at Lena, and for the first time in their marriage, she saw something other than contempt or cold authority in his eyes. She saw confusion. She saw disbelief. And beneath it all, she saw a flicker of something he had never shown her before. Fear. Not fear of her physical prowess, but fear of what she had just exposed. Then he was naked in front of his entire tribe, his identity as the dominant, untouchable force utterly demolished. Lena didn't move. She didn't run. She didn't apologize. She stood her ground, breathing heavily, looking down at the man who had terrorized her for years, the man who had just grabbed her in a room full of 1,000 people, believing his status made him untouchable, the man who had just learned that his status meant nothing against the right of a person to be free from harm. Commander Vance, who had been across the room, pushed his way through the crowd. He took one look at the scene, the SEAL on the floor, the trembling but resolute woman standing over him. He didn't need a playbook for this. He understood immediately. He looked at Lena, his eyes full of a profound and sorrowful respect. Then he looked down at Marcus, who was now slowly, painfully getting to his knees. Vance didn't offer him a hand. He simply looked at the fallen man, then at the ring of stunned, silent faces around them. "Master-at-Arms," he said, his voice calm, but carrying the undeniable weight of command. A young master-at-arms, the Navy's military police, stepped forward. "Please escort Chief Strickland to the base medical clinic for evaluation, and then to my office. We need to have a conversation." The command was clear. This was no longer a private marital dispute. This was an incident involving a senior non-commissioned officer witnessed by over 1,000 personnel. It was a command issue now. As the master-at-arms helped a dazed and ashen-faced Marcus to his feet, Lena finally moved. She sat back down in her chair, her legs finally giving way. And her hands were still shaking. Around her the crowd began to disperse, ushered away by senior NCOs, but the whispers would linger for years. A young female sailor, a corpsman, knelt beside Lena. Ma'am, are you all right? Can I get you some water?" Lena looked at her, this young woman with kind eyes and a worried expression. She looked at the sea of faces, some staring, some quickly looking away, some filled with a dawning, uncomfortable. Had the command launched an inquiry, not just into the altercation in the auditorium, but into the climate of their household. Lena was provided with a victim advocate, legal counsel, and a protective order. The wall of silence she had lived behind for years had crumbled. For Marcus, the fall was catastrophic. His career, his identity, his entire world was built on a foundation of respect and control. In one moment, his wife had shattered both. The leadership core of the SEAL teams, men he had served with for decades, looked at him differently now. The whispers weren't about his heroism anymore. They were about his wife, about the fear in her eyes, about him lying on the floor. The investigation revealed a pattern of coercive control that fell just short of the legal definition of assault, until that night. That night, in front of 1,040 witnesses, he had provided the evidence himself. He was processed for Article 128 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, assault. Lena didn't press charges initially, but the military justice system doesn't require a victim to press charges for an offense witnessed by a brigade. The command took over. They saw the bruises on her arm, the fading yellow and purple evidence of his grip. They had the testimony of 1,000 people who saw him grab her and 100 who saw him on the ground. The case was airtight. Marcus was given a choice: face a court-martial, a public trial that would bring shame upon himself and the entire NSW community, or accept an other-than-honorable discharge and leave the service immediately. For a man like Marcus, the choice was no choice at all. He signed the papers. 6 months later, Madlena sat in a small, sunlit apartment off base. The divorce was final. She had full custody of their son. The apartment was sparse, but it was hers. It was quiet. There were no coiled silences, no doors slamming, no heavy footsteps that made her heart race. There was just the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the sound of her son laughing in the next room, watching a cartoon. There was a soft knock at the door. She opened it to find a package. It was a letter and a small, simple wooden box. The letter was from Commander Vance, now retired. It read, "Lena, I thought you should have this. It's a trident, the insignia of a Navy SEAL. It was given to me by my first commanding officer, who told me that true strength isn't about what you can do to a person, but what you can do for them. For years, I thought I understood what that meant. And then I met you. You taught me, and over 1,000 others, a lesson in true strength that night. You showed us that courage isn't always a weapon. Sometimes it's a shield, and sometimes it's a line drawn in the sand. You did what many of us train a lifetime to do. You defended the defenseless. You defended yourself. Wear this or don't. But know that you earned it more than most men I've ever pinned it on. You are a warrior." With deepest respect, Elias Vance Lena opened the box. The gold trident lay on a bed of velvet gleaming in the afternoon light. She picked it up. It was heavier than she expected. She thought of the weight of it, the weight of the title, the weight of the expectation. She thought of Marcus, how he had used it as a weapon, a club to assert dominance. She thought of the night in the auditorium, and the feel of his grip, the sound of his voice. Remember, I'm a Navy SEAL. She remembered. She remembered the fear. She remembered the shock in his eyes as he fell. She remembered the silence, and then the whispers, and then the freedom. She closed her fingers around the trident, its edges pressing into her palm. Then she walked into her son's room and sat on the floor next to him. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with curiosity. "What's that, Mommy?" Lena looked at the gleaming insignia in her hand, then back at her son's innocent face. She thought of Commander Vance's words. True strength isn't about what you can do to a person, but what you can do for them. "It's a reminder, baby," she said softly, pulling him into a hug. "A reminder that you are always worth fighting for."